Yeah, I'm going to try. There it is. Okay.
Take whatever inspires you and turn it into a one-of-a-kind outdoor living space with AZEK deck trim and pavers. Whether you dream of a luxurious place to entertain or the timeless elegance of craftsmanship and curb appeal, AZEK's suite of low-maintenance building products allows you to refine your home with durable, lasting beauty. AZEK building products, designed to last beautifully.
She blinded me with science. suppose they call that a novelty act?
I don't know, but it wasn't too bad.
Well, that's a novelty.
Can everybody hear me okay? Back in the room, raise your hand. Awesome. So welcome to today's session, where we're going to be talking about Pattern Lab and sort of our design, communication, collaboration. First, just to get started, we'd like to see a bit who the audience is. And so raise your hand if you do any of the following activities. So how many of you do wireframes? Oh, good, a good number. How many of you do user testing? Nice, not as many. How about content strategy? A couple, okay. How about front-end development? Oh, a lot more, good. How about like visual design? Interaction design? How about site building, Drupal site building? Okay, a lot more, good. How about like module development? Migrations, workflow, that kind of stuff. Cool, oh good, we got a good group. How about project management? Any project managers? A couple, not that many. How about like content creators? You create content, manage sites, a couple, okay. So we have a nice mix, but it seems like the majority of you are front-end developers, a couple of back-end developers and designers. Well, that's cool, because this is the UX track. How many of you have used like a style guide? Cool. So a variety of different, how many of you used like a front-end style guide? Or, cool, documentation. Okay, cool. So, to get started, my name is Dan Moyard.
For some reason, it's not taking the keyboard commands.
There you go. Now you can see me. So my name is Dan Moyard, and I am the lead front-end developer at Form 1. And I've been doing web development for over 15 years now, and I've been doing Drupal since about 2008, when Drupal 6 first came out. I've done a lot of work, accessibility, front-end performance, theming, that kind of stuff. And at Form 1, I'm sort of the responsible for handling all of like the front-end architecture at Form 1 at itself. So like on all of our projects, coming up with best practices, the way we approach things. And then I'm also on, they usually try to stick me on some of the larger projects to handle front-end architecture for sites like the EPA, the USDA, and actually the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture, which we'll actually be demoing today. So I hope you'll enjoy that. And you can also find me on the internet at DC Moyed, pretty much everywhere. That's my Drupal.org username, Twitter handle, GitHub, all that stuff.
And I'm Daniel. I work as a senior interaction designer, so I specialize mostly in pure visual design. I have a long background in front-end development as well, with a lot of the HTML and CSS. A lot of focus in Section 508 accessibility, since a lot of my career was spent in the federal government. So I think that's a big concern of mine, and I like going to there's a convention in D.C. called Ideas. That's one where they bring in a lot of different people from different agencies to focus on Section 508, and so it's a passion. I really like it, and we try to integrate that kind of stuff in our front end. And I've been with Forum 1 for a while now, working with Dan quite a bit as the visual designer, and Dan is a themer. And so this pattern lab usage that we're going to talk to you about today was really new to me as a visual designer. So it's for those of you who specialize mostly in visual design, I hope it can, a lot of the concerns I had with using this process will kind of speak to you, and some of the pros that we're going to show you and things like that. And also pictured with me there is my Chief Keyboard Obstruction Officer. He's really good on my work from home days. His numbers have been outstanding this quarter. So he couldn't be here today. He's in a kiddie condo resort until I come back, or kiddie prison as I like to call it. But yeah. So what we're going to do is really just a quick overview. I like to just kind of get real quick to the point, like why you're here, show you like our whys and what we're going to talk about before we get into the big backstory, to just get to the point pretty quickly. So yeah, what did we do differently that we were doing before? That's one of the key things, that we were doing things a certain way, and obviously this is very different. And we're going to show you exactly what it is we changed in our workflow. And I don't know if any of you were at the Phase 2 new design workflow session yesterday, but that one has interesting correlations to our presentation. I was looking at I wasn't able to attend personally, but I looked at the presentation, the YouTube video of it, and it's very interesting to me how much our ideas became so similar, even though we were not communicating or collaborating on this. So it's kind of cool. I felt like we're not crazy. This is not a way out there idea if other people came to the same conclusions. So number one is a new tool, and the tool, obviously, Pattern Lab we used. While that's what we use, there's many different tools you could use in this very same process. Doesn't necessarily need to use Pattern Lab, but that's what we use. We like it. And what we basically did is we sort of added a step in between the creation of the static comps, be it Photoshop, Fireworks, Sketch, whatever you're using to create your static designs, and the theming, and sort of, it's not really like an additional step. We'll get into the details later, but it is an additional thing that we're doing that we were not doing before. And at first glance, it feels kind of like, why are you doing this? You're almost like theming twice, but we'll get into the pros, basically, of that later on in the presentation. And this is what really speaks to me as a designer, the new mental models. Here's your designer like being forced to rethink how they design. So those of you who are not visual designers, one of the big things about art of any kind, whether it's music, stage production, or web design, is composition, like the relationship between object A and object B. That as an artist, you start to get an idea of, well, like this, like if I nudge this over here and you nudge this over here, something about it feels right. And I'm sure if you dig deep in there, there's some mathematical relationship, the golden ratio. But as you become better at design, you start to like really appreciate composition. Like I love Cezanne and just the fruit arrangements, and it just looks like a bowl of fruit. But to me, it's like I just like wow every time I see it. So when I heard about this modular design process, that we'll get into more detail, which focuses more on the individual fruit in the Cezanne painting and not necessarily the entire composition, I was like, what? How can I know where to put object A and object B if I don't have a clear picture of it? So I was not initially sold on the idea when I first heard about this kind of stuff from a presentation by Brad Frost, who created the Pattern Lab. So this is really, I think to a lot of developers, this is not a new model. Modular design is like, you guys have heard of it, understand the need to focus on components. But for visual designers, a lot of visual designers, it's kind of a radically new concept. So I'll pass it to Dan.
So the tool that we ended up using was Pattern Lab. And so basically you can think of it sort of like a static site generator. You can actually quickly ramp up and build all of these HTML, CSS, JavaScript prototypes. And so one of the big benefits of using Pattern Lab is, as Daniel mentioned, is it really helped us, as a front-end developer and a themer, usually when we sort of like theme a site, we normally think of in terms of components, like design components. And we've always had been a tough sell trying to, share with clients, and more visual designers as far as the importance of sort of like these modular, reusable design components. And once we used Pattern Lab and we sort of showed that, it was a real big game changer. It was sort of like the light bulb went on, and they're like, oh, okay. So, and it really helped a lot.
Yeah, the arrows are working for some reason.
And so just a real quick, this is a real quick screenshot of one of our pages in Pattern Lab. We'll get into more detail later as far as an actual demo, where I'll show you all the different parts of what is in Pattern Lab, and you'll even be able to follow along on your own device. So make sure you have your laptop, tablets, and phones ready for that.
So the why, the why do we do this? To me, this is something that, again, it's preaching to the choir, but for visual designers, sometimes this can be kind of a radically new concept. I don't know if any of you saw a presentation by Dave Olson called "The Death of Lorem Ipsum," and the theme of his presentation was, stop with this like theoretical. I mean, yeah, there's some value in sketching and comps, but at the end of the day, you're producing a site that's going to go live, and that's the end product. So he wanted to focus less on the lorem ipsum and more on tweaking, like stop nudging all the little things in Photoshop and nudge things to make them better in your actual medium. So the real content, the real design, the real medium, which is the browser. So that's a big reason to switch to relying more on Pattern Lab and less on the static comps. And yeah, so that we're designing and building, again, in the final medium, the browser. So we'll get more into the workflow in detail, but right now we haven't eliminated static comps. All our designers are still doing like an initial stab at the design in Photoshop, and then we're taking all these components and putting them into Pattern Lab, and from that point forward, we're iterating and designing in, again, all this stuff. So that's one huge reason why Pattern Lab is really good for making sure that your final product is like good quality.
Yeah, and there's some other reasons why Pattern Lab was such a big benefit for us. And right now, I'm just going to give you some of the high-level big benefits. Then we'll get into more detail as far as the specific details of why it was so important, a big game changer for us. So some of it was they really increased the communication, the collaboration, not only between Daniel and myself, a designer and a front-end developer, but also with clients, also with project managers, also with people who are building the wireframe, people who are developing and site building in Drupal. It gave us a tool where we could all sort of come together and quickly prototype and collaborate and talk through all of the various issues and pain points that we might be going through.
Yeah, now let's dive in. Now we've kind of gone over like what the new tool is, some of the high-level reasons why, and you actually saw a little bit of it, but we're going to demo it a little bit more. I really wanted a pun there, like, wow, let's dive in, but I think I was trying too hard, so leave it alone. So we wanted to start a little bit about the evolution of the design process that happened in Forum 1, and maybe this mirrors some of the design process in your own daily work or as in the industry as a whole. And before I get into that a little bit more, these are some of the kind of standard design deliverables that came out of our design process. We had our mood boards, our style tiles, our static comps, and there's all kinds of other things that get delivered as part of the design. And I think at Pattern Lab, the one thing it really replaces is the style tiles and, to an extent, the static comps. As I mentioned earlier, we're still doing the initial stab at the design in a tool like Photoshop. but then we're iterating in Pattern Lab, and we're replacing. We used to. There was a project I worked on where we had all the view modes in a big Photoshop file, and we had to go back and update the Photoshop file. As Phase 2 mentioned in their presentation, a style guide is only as good as how recent it is. If you base your whole site design on a style guide that's a year old, it didn't work out the way it's supposed to be. So one of the benefits of Pattern Labs is a living style guide. So we're not doing these static style tiles anymore. We're moving them into Pattern Lab, which you'll see later.
Right, so about 5 years ago, our design process was pretty strictly a waterfall process. You would have somebody who would create the wireframe. And you would sort of like silo different things that you would sort of like, somebody would do the wireframe, pass it along to the designer, who would create, Photoshop comps. Who would pass it to the developer, who would start to build out the site based on the wireframe in the design. And then finally the themer would come along and take whatever was built in Drupal and make sure it matches the comp. And so this led to a lot of problems as far as communication. There was a lot of out-of-touch things. People didn't realize that they had to design something, or people didn't realize they had to build something a certain way. And so some of the problems that we came across.
Yeah, so some of the problems we faced, not quite as dramatic as that, but I think in your mind it feels that way sometimes. Some of the problems we faced using that waterfall process is that and some of these are more of my concern as a visual designer. I know every person in a project has different concerns. A project manager has different concerns than a developer and themer and visual designer. But for me, one of the big, huge things is that the finished site wasn't as polished as it like maybe to a person who sees it for the first time, they're like, oh, that's pretty, that looks nice. But for me, I can't unsee all these things that it could be so much better if we only had time to like tweak the margins a little bit and adjust the line height a little bit and slightly tweak the font color just a nudge this way. All these little things really add up to the polish of a site, and that what really makes something that give it that like oomph that you're like, wow, there's something about this site that it really speaks to me. And then also a lot of because that waterfall workflow that you saw the chart, you have you have Photoshop comps, you hand it off, then there's the development that's going on in Drupal, and all this is happening because the theming kind of has to wait for some of the development to happen before you can get to theming. So then you have this short amount of time where you can do a dedicated theming run, and that's, there's all these fires to put out. Whoops. Speaking of disasters, there's all these fires to put out, and a lot of them don't include the margins and nudging the font a little bit that way or things like that. And so what's great about Pattern Lab is that you're able to concentrate on the front end much earlier at the same time as development is going on. So you have much more time to notice bugs and fix all these little tiny things that, again, really add up to a polished site. Some additional problems. Again, not as dramatic as that. And by the way, does anyone know the source of this thing? This is like from the early days of the internet. I've never found a source for who created it or what the backstory is, but no one? All right, never mind. So I don't know where it's from. It's a mystery. But the visual designers, I like to think that I'm a little more aware of how my content that I create in a static design is going to live on the web, that there's certain things you have to account for. But no matter what, you're going to make assumptions like this heading level 1 looks really pretty as long as it's this length, but then when you start populating it with realistic content from the site owner, it's like 5 lines big and it doesn't look as pretty as it once did. So then you need to tweak all that stuff. And again, with more of the waterfall process, you don't necessarily have time, and you're like, oh, I wish I could get to that. And some of the other problems is that the clients would want to see, like, I love the comp you created. I think this is great. I think this is how our site should look. But how would it look if, with my blog post, I have this blog post right here. I want to put it in your new design. Can I see how that looks like? And before, we'd say, not really. You're going to have to wait a while. And now in Pattern Lab, we can do it really, really quickly. Like, here, go, cut and paste your content. This is what it's going to look like. And again, you're going to notice problems like, whoa, your average blog post is like this or that or the other, and maybe we need to tweak things a bit. So it really helps in that way.
Right, so over the past 5 years, as we sort of like try to refine our design process, we've been gradually adding more and more ways that we can increase collaboration and increase communication. So we were still generally in the waterfall process, and it was a real struggle to sort of get that into an agile workflow. So we started using agile on project, and it really makes it a lot easier to sort of structure out what you're going to build, when you're going to build it, and have all these ideas of stories of when you're going to attack them, and make project management a lot easier. And so we wanted to apply a lot of those same principles to a design process. And so we gradually added, different ways of getting, more input into wireframes. Instead of just handing over the wireframe, we'd have more meetings where people would, the developer, the front-end developer, the designer, everybody can have input on the wireframe, and so that we can get ahead of the curve of, finding the problem that might be there, much sooner rather than later when it, it's much more of a headache to fix, and it takes longer, and it's more of a problem. We also wanted to do a lot of more collaboration between designers and themers. Instead of just having a Photoshop comp, we would have some more front-end input into the Photoshop comps as they were during the design process. And a couple years later, we started getting into more collaboration where we would have, essentially it'd be like pair programming, where you have two different developers sit down and they work on stuff. They can learn a lot from each other. And so we would have designers and front-end developers sort of sit down side by side and, work on implementing the design. And so there was a lot more communication and collaboration. The front-end developers would get a lot more design knowledge, design theory, and the designers would get a lot more of the front-end CSS best practices, all these cool things that we can do in CSS that they weren't aware of. And so it really helped our evolution in the design process really got more and more communication and collaboration.
So then we're modular design, which we mentioned a few times. So I think we would kind of want to get into a little bit as to what we're talking about when we're talking about modular design. So this is, you probably heard this before, the designing systems, not pages, which this is what initially kind of bothered me when I first heard about it, with the composition. How can I know what to design all of the components until I see the page? So I'll get into that in a bit, but as you see, we're looking for reusable interface patterns. And we'll talk a little bit about Google Material Design, which gets into this kind of stuff as well. So as I said, with the Photoshop comp, you can still do, your design the static page, and from that have a starting point to start to look at your elements that you pull out. This is your heading level 1, your P tag, your call out text, your sidebar, your left navigation, top navigation, error messages, what have you, and use that as a starting point. And then you have all these little components that are then your little Lego blocks, your system that you're going to be reusing throughout your site. There's no reason to, if you have one error message, to now create a totally different one from a search form as to a registration form. You should reuse the exact same component, which is, again, kind of a duh thing for everyone else. But for visual designers, sometimes they're like, well, on this page, I'm going to, I want the error message to look like this, which maybe in an ideal world if you had infinite time, but realistically, you need to reuse all this stuff. So the pattern lab allows you to focus on the components, and as you saw on that previous slide where we were zapping the designer, I think this helps train visual designers to start thinking when they create their designs that this needs to be reused. While I like how it looks here, how would it look on this page? And if it doesn't look good on that page, you need to tweak it. And so it really helps to reframe your thinking and how you make everything look aesthetically pleasing while at the same time being reusable and scalable and things like that. So atomic design is one type of modular design. As you can see, it has a metaphor of atoms, molecules, and organisms. And any one of you with any sort of biological sciences background, forgive if it's not totally accurate, but you get the idea that it's one level of complexity, another level of complexity, and then yet another level of complexity. And Pattern Lab out of the box is built using those metaphors. You have an atom section that you click on, and it shows you all your atoms, your heading level 1, your paragraph, your links, things like that. It also has the molecule section. So for example, a button might be an atom, and then a molecule might be your search field plus button, and then an organism might be your entire header that includes that particular molecule that you could reuse, for example, for a newsletter sign-up, because it's still a field plus a submit button. So it's a pretty simple to understand method of modular design, and you could totally redefine it to be whatever you want, but this is what we've kind of stuck to. We haven't relabeled it in our use of Pattern Lab.
So sort of a brief technical aside. I know this is the UX track, so I'm not going to get into too much detail, but I did want to mention that there are ways of sort of architecting the styles in front-end development, and the one that we use at Forum 1 is SMACs. And it's a way to sort of organize your CSS into essentially components. And we use BEM, the block element modifier, as a way of naming our classes. And so as a front-end perspective, we have all of these sort of discrete, reusable UI functions that we style. And it makes it a lot easier for maintenance. And so we like to tie these front-end sort of style components with the actual design components. And so in our process, we keep those together, and it makes it a lot easier. And finally, I highly recommend that you check out the Drupal 8 CSS architecture guidelines. It's a wonderful documentation on Drupal.org that sort of outlines why we want to use SMACs, why we want to use the BEM naming conventions, and sort of essentially to eliminate some of the unintended consequences of using CSS. Rather than so you just style specific things, and later when you try to redo something, you're not worried as whether it's going to break something on a completely different page. Okay, so style guides. So what are we talking about when we say style guides in this presentation? So there are a lot of different types. There are like the writing style guide, like the Chicago Manual style. There are like coding standards. You can think of those as a style guide. You can also think of maybe like the tone and voice style guides, like how do you communicate when you write a blog post, like what form do you take, to communicate. There's also branding style guides, like what the logo looks like, how much space there should be around it, what are the colors. So what we're talking about are sort of the high fidelity living, front-end style guides, where it's actually more of a prototype HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And so there's a variety of different types of style guides. And the two basic flavors. So the two basic flavors of style guides is there's things that sort of like depend on comments. They sort of parse comments in CSS or SAC. Stuff like style.go and KSS, which I recommend, by the way. There is right after this session in, I think, room 409. John Albans is going to be giving a session on style guide-driven development. It's in the front-end track. It's going to be a lot more technical. And so I highly recommend you check out that if you want a lot more technical detail on this sort of approach. So in addition to sort of like the documentation, parsing comments, there's also another type that uses sort of like static site generators. Whether you can use them from scratch using something like Jekyll or Middleman. And there's also been a lot of tools that sort of swung up recently, like style prototypes, Pattern Primer, and Pattern Lab, which is what we use. So that's the approach that we've taken. So now we're going to dive into a demo. So, and you are going to get to follow along. So if you have your desktop, laptop, tablet, phone, whatever with you, check out this link.
I just hope we don't overload the Wi-Fi, but we'll see.
Okay. Yeah, so basically we got permission from a client that we worked with at the USDA. It's the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And this is sort of the finished product that we have online for the style guide that we built in Pattern Lab. And if you'll notice in the URL at the end, it's the V8. This was our first project using Pattern Lab. And to sort of, as a learning process, we, at the end of each sprint, so we used Agile, we had a sprint saying, what are we going to design, what are we going to work on, what are we going to build? And we had Pattern Lab as part of that process. And so you can, if you not right now, but like later you want to play around, go back to version 1, and you can see exactly how the style guide looked like when we didn't add anything. And gradually added V2, V3, all the way up to V8. And you can sort of see the evolution of the design process of each of the design components, how we sort of started at the atoms and the smaller stuff and built them into larger and larger components. So now for the demo of Pattern Lab.
We need to mirror it, actually. hold on. I need to mirror it. Technical difficulties.
So in Pattern Lab, as you're looking around and thinking, you'll see at the top there's like this black bar. And so I'll explain some of the things, what goes in there. And so you'll see that at the upper left, you can see the atoms, the molecules, and the organisms, and then the templates and pages. And so these basically follow the atomic design. So we had all the atoms, the very simplest items. The molecules, the stuff that was a little more complicated. Maybe some of them had atoms within them. And the organisms were some of the most complex things that we had that had often a variety of different atoms in them or different molecules in them. And then we put them together into sort of layouts on specific landing pages, or specific detail pages, and sort of put all these things together. And the template is more or less like stuff without any real content in it. We just sort of dummy content. We wanted to see what something would look like with all the fields in it, for example. And then the pages, the next one is where we would have actual content to put in, for example, like a blog detail page or an event. The next thing I want to show is in the right-hand corner on the top in the toolbar, there's a lot of really cool tools for front-end developers. The first is Pattern Lab uses iframe to show the width of something. And one easy way is you can actually enter in a specific breakpoint. You can see what something looked at a different size. And then it also has, not on this one, but there's also an option if you have a wide desktop, it'll show SML, which is small, medium, large, and that'll just basically take you to a random small size image. It'll take you to a random large. And the reason is we want you to think not in terms of specific devices, because you really shouldn't be designing something just for an iPhone, something just for an Android tablet. There's so many different screen sizes out there that you're never going to know what it's going to be. And in the future, it keeps changing. Just having like the phablet that are really big phones. So you want to think in terms of just general sizes, tweak things depending on the size. Another thing to take a look at is the search. So we have a lot of different components. Maybe you're not sure where something is. So for example, we want to know where. I know there's a breadcrumb component somewhere. So we type that in. Sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing.
Hold on, sorry. There's a breadcrumb.
Okay.
Yeah, there it goes. Nothing happened. Oh, it's loading. That's why.
Oh yeah. So you can see what that specific component looks like. There's also under the eye icon. One cool thing is you can actually see the code views. So for example, you've built out a component and you want to see what that markup is, so you can put it into Drupal. You can easily see this view and see exactly what the HTML is for that. So when somebody builds it out in Drupal, they know exactly what the markup should be, exactly what the classes should be. For those of you that are on a mobile device looking at Pattern Lab, it might be a bit difficult to sort of navigate, especially because it uses the iframe for the different widths. And so one cool feature is under the iPhone, under the icon and stuff, if you go down to open in a new window, it sort of breaks out of that iframe. And so you can see a specific component or a specific page, and that's the one that you can really test in any tablet, phone, and really see what something looks like, rather than just an approximation on a desktop with the resizing the screen. There's also, we took it out of it for NIFA because we didn't really use it. But one thing that we are using in the future is something called annotations. And with annotations, you can actually create sort of text written documentation on each specific component. So for example, you want to talk about the logo, for example, and you had all this sort of conversation about what it should look like, how it should change over time. And so you can put notes in the annotations. And some of our developers are really getting excited that we can put some of our sort of build specs into these annotations. And so this Pattern Lab becomes sort of the style guide and sort of the build spec, like how we want to build something. Are we going to use display suite for this? Is it just going to be a view mode? Is it just, a custom view? What particular, panels layouts we want to use with this? We can all put this into these annotations and have become sort of a one-stop shop for the documentation of how something looks, how it reacts, and how it's built. So some examples for, let's see here, for actual components. So like if we go into atoms, we can look at, you can either look at something specific like headings. You can see what all the headings look like, and you can see what they look like at different screen widths, for example. And you can sort of see how it makes it really easy to do like responsive typography. You can easily change things and see how the heading size has changed. You can also look at different categories. So instead of just headings, you can take a look at all of the text and see what headings look like. See what paragraphs look like. Oh, did it not work?
No, it's loading.
Okay. And one cool thing that we use that's in Pattern Lab that we use on this project is you can assign states to the different components. So as you're looking, you might have noticed like on some of these components, there's like a green dot next to them. Some of them have a red dot next to them. Some have a yellow dot. So what we did is we were sort of able to see which components we've worked on, which one we haven't. And so our process was stuff that had a red dot next to it is stuff that we hadn't really tackled yet. It's in Pattern Lab. We haven't really done anything with it yet. The stuff that's yellow is the stuff that we worked on in that sprint, whether to sort of just wireframe it real quickly in that sprint or actually do some design work and it's ready to show to the client. So at the end of the sprint, during our sprint review meetings, we would have go over each of these components that were yellow with the client, and they'd be like, oh, yeah, I like this, this, this. And then after the sprint, the ones that we said, okay, these are finished, we mark them as green. And the cool thing about Pattern Lab is that you sort of build these different components together and make larger and more components. If at any point you change something in a page, for example, has all these variety of different, Pattern Lab components, and later you go and you change one of the smaller components, like a molecule, for example, you change something so it's not the latest version anymore. The blog page, for example, might go from green back to yellow or red or whatever the state of that earlier thing was. So you can always keep a good idea. Even if you change stuff that's smaller, still know the state of the design of that particular page. To get into some more Drupal-specific stuff, some of the cool things we did is we put in our image styles. Okay, so like we would have in Drupal, you can easily create sort of image styles, so you have all of your image sizes that you might use across the site is all consistent. And so we put these image styles into Pattern Lab, so we always know, these are the image styles you want to use on this particular view mode, on this particular search result. We also put stuff in like dates, custom dates. So in Drupal you can have custom date formats. And on some of the way we wanted to show content, maybe we want like a short date. Maybe we want something that's more longer that shows the year and the month and the day of the week. And so this really allows us to sort of build up these custom specific to Drupal. And Pattern Lab is so flexible, you can use it with anything. I mean, we even use it on WordPress sites. You can use it with a custom one-page app. It's not Drupal specific, but it gives you enough flexibility. You can use whatever end result you're going to use within Pattern Lab. So let's take a look at some of the molecules. Here, let's look at some of the Drupal specific one. So like these are things like, if you're using the calendar module and you have a calendar, what does it look like? We put that in Pattern Lab so that anytime we need a calendar, that's output with with views and stuff. It's just right there. And we can sort of combine those later on pages, and sidebars and stuff. We also have, like the messages that are in Drupal. These are some of the things that we don't really think about, when you design a Drupal site. Usually that's something that you don't really see, you just leave it whatever the default is. And we have it in Pattern Lab so that you can see what it looks like, And so there's some things where we had it out of the box, and the client liked it. They didn't really want to change it. So we just kept it whatever that design was. Something maybe we did want to change. Maybe we did want to change what the pager looks like. And so we can easily see what we still need to work on, what we still are seeing. We also put, you can also put like navigation, like menus, so you can see what they look like just by themselves. And if you look under organisms, again, these are some of the more complex things. So one thing that we did on this project is, Drupal, when you're in the theme layer, you can have these concepts of sort of regions. And so we would create these regions, and we would say, okay, in this particular region, we want to have the site name. In this region, we want the main menu. This region, we want the footer menu. And so you can sort of build these as well as region, and those go later into the layout templates for individual landing pages or detail pages. We also did content types. If you want to see something, this is just what, like, when you're looking at a content type detail page, this is just what that little page is without all the wrapper. So you can focus on specifically a specific design component. And so it really makes it easy to, when you're like designing a content type page, you're not, a lot of times clients, when you get to that point, clients are worried about, well, what about this over here? What about that over there? We're like, no. Just focus on the center. And so this really helps you sort of narrow the focus when you're talking in meeting, to be really clear about what you're talking about and what you want to communicate. We also put view modes. So at the end of before, we tried to really, we had a process where we wanted to show different view modes, for example. And so we would have, like, Photoshop files, like all these different view modes that were designed. And that becomes really, cumbersome to sort of keep that up to date. And so we're having them in Pattern Lab makes it very easy. These are the different view modes that we're going to have. And so some of the templates where we start to put some of these things together, let's see, maybe look at calendar. And so you can see this is where it first starts to look like an actual page. You can see where we've sort of imported like all of the region design components that also have themselves other design components. And so you can see how they sort of build together to create larger, more complex things. And you can see how things you can very quickly prototype how pages is working. There's no scrolling.
That's good. It's like the other way. Whatever you're doing, opposite. There you go.
Oh, okay. No wonder I was confused. Okay, so you can see how things change, how things get added together. And then under pages, this is where it's essentially the same thing as the template, except we put in actual content. So let's take a detail, for example, like a blog page, with an actual blog article. What the title, the image for the article. And you can even do pages that are all based on the same previous template and do something slightly different. So, for example, we had like a blog admin view. If you log in and you can edit it, this is where the messages would go. This is where, the Drupal toolbar would go. So please feel free to sort of, share this around, play around with it, get more detail as far as, again, I mentioned the different versions from V1 through V8. You can see sort of the evolution of the design on this site.
Back to the slide presentation. Oops. Sorry, guys. Here we go. Okay, so if you need a reminder of the bit.ly, it's pattern-lab-nifa. So that's like a shortcut to get to that same exact thing. And I think it's one of my favorite things about Pattern Lab is you can literally play with it. It's it's user-friendly. You're not going to mess anything up. You're not going to, whoops, I committed something to core or whatever. This is like purely nothing in playing with the front is going to ruin anything. So it's fun to play with. And our client literally had fun playing with it. Like at one point, because we were mirroring the displays and the Pattern Lab was a little bit squished, it starts to eliminate some of the menu options as you start squishing it. But if you had seen it at a wider screen, you'd see the SML for small, medium, and large, and also disco mode. And everyone, when they see disco mode, they're like, what's that? And they want to click on it. And all it does is it randomly resizes the browser. and to check for bugs, and it's cute, and the client loved it. At one point, we took it out just to unclutter the top thing, and she asked for it back. She's like, "Wait, where's my disco mode?" So, yeah, it's fun. It's actually like, besides being useful, people like it. And going back to, hold on, let me see if I can expand that. Going back to a little bit more visual design specific, this is exactly my reaction when I first heard Brad Frost's presentation on atomic design, is that, yeah, it's going to stifle my creativity. You're limiting me. Like, who are you to tell me that I have to limit my stuff to these reusable patterns? And we'll get into, a little bit as to the counter and to how I obviously changed my thinking because I'm advocating Pattern Lab now. Oops, lost my arrow.
So some of the benefits that we came across with using Pattern Lab is quite significant. And the first one is, I think that really helped is in sort of our meetings. So you can normally, the expression, an image is worth 1,000 words. And what we found is that these sort of living prototypes are worth 1,000 meetings. Instead of having to quickly, show different images, to go back, talk about it later. Okay, well, what are you talking about this? What do you mean? What if, and so just here, look at this, look at it on your browser. It makes it very easy to have communications and say, oh, okay, this is exactly what you're talking about. Another cool thing with Pattern Lab is you have sort of a shared vocabulary now. Everybody knows what a teaser is. Everybody knows what you mean when you say secondary menu. Everybody knows what you mean when you talk about a certain date format. There's also a lot of sort of sharing, knowledge, improving the maintainability of it. You can also use Pattern Lab, when you sort of, later when you're doing maintenance, say, okay, well, at some point we want to create a new page. And so it's a lot easier to say, oh, well, we already have all these design components. Let's start putting these together, and see what's missing that we want to add. It also makes it a lot easier later if you want to do you sort of want to keep the back end, the way things are going, but you want to change the front end, the theme, how things look. To have stuff in Pattern Lab, it's a lot easier to make changes.
So this is a claim on the Pattern Lab website. It's like a marketing promise, and it's one of those things like, yeah, right, but we definitely have found that to be true, that it's helping us be much quicker with how we launch sites. A recent project we worked on, and we wish we could show it, but it's still like in a beta launch, and there's still some sensitivity, but that one had a really short time frame. And in kind of researching this presentation, I spoke to some of the project managers at our company, like, how did Pattern Lab affect this project? Was it negative, positive? And they literally was miraculous, is what I got, that without it, they could not have launched it, that the client had much more confidence because she could see the site in Pattern Lab, those pages that Dan was showing you. She saw, like, oh, okay, it's like, while the Drupal site itself is not quite themed, I see in Pattern Lab you have all your ducks in a row. I trust you. I know you can launch it, so good. So it helped her have confidence, and she could show it to her stakeholders at her company and say, like, look, check it out. Like, we're on our way, and like they don't really care that it's Pattern Lab versus the actual Drupal site per se. That just they're seeing stuff in code in the browser, see it's responsive, so they're really happy. And we'll show a little diagram a little bit later that just describes like why it's quicker. But in a nutshell, we're getting development to happen at the same time that the theming and the visual designer working with the themer to like tweak things, and the project manager and the client, they're all looking at Pattern Lab. Everyone responds quicker visually. I forgot what presentation I was looking at recently that said, actually, it was Lulabot, I believe, that yesterday on, and he was saying that words are an abstraction layer around reality, which I was like, what? But he's like, mind blown. But yeah, visually, we're visual creatures. Words are an abstraction we've invented to communicate. And so having Pattern Lab, you're literally looking at the stuff. You have things labeled. It's much clearer. It helps eliminate the issues that come with assumptions. So I can let this play for a second because it's... So deal with it. So what I was getting at before, Brad Frost's quote on like this visual design system stifling creativity. To deal with it. Like it helps. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Matias Duarte of Google, who worked previously at Palm Pre. Now he's vice president of design at Google, and he's behind material design. He's why your Google apps are starting to look prettier. And anyway, so he said that material design system, which is modular and reusable components, it's a constraint, but these constraints made the design decisions easier because instead of 50 doors in front of you, you have 2. So now it's so much easier to start to make these decisions. Things are unified. Google has so many apps across so many different devices. We're using it right now with Google Slides, and he's helping to unify it by using this modular design principle. So I don't know if they're using Pattern Lab, but they're definitely using that philosophy. And for the designers, it's really transformative. It's helping to get all these people with different development teams and all these different environments across the world for Google speak a unified visual language, which is great for branding.
Okay, so let's do a little bit of recap. So what we did is we had sort of the waterfall approach, and we tried over the years to make just various ways to sort of improve the collaboration, improve the communication. And so, over the years we tried to try all these different things, and so the Pattern Lab really became a big game changer for us. And so we had sort of this new sort of collaboration workflow where we have these sort of different areas that can sort of work together at the same time. You can have the wireframe, and have a lot of interaction between designers, themers, and developers, helping with the wireframe. And so with these, there's a lot of sort of back and forth between these different areas. And so like with the designers and themers, you can work more on working together in Pattern Lab, doing a lot more collaboration, completely separate from the Drupal site build, because you're working in Pattern Lab. Whereas you can do the site building, and the Drupal development of the site completely separate. They don't need to worry about when they do it. They don't need to worry about, panels layouts really anymore. They don't really need to worry about, how the specific view mode, like what they're going to look like. They just know there's going to be this view mode. And there's a lot of interaction with developers in Pattern Lab, and so we can sort of talk and discuss. Okay, well, in this particular, thing, how do we want to do it? Do we want to use panels? Do we want to use layouts? Do you want to use, a specific plugin for this? Do you want to use a view mode for that kind of stuff? A lot of that discussion, is a lot more lively now. We can easily ping shut on IM. Hey, take a look at this link on Pattern Lab. How do you want to tackle this? And so the really key thing is you want to be flexible, and Pattern Lab allows you to be flexible. It's not really something that has a lot of opinion about how it is structured. Out of the box, it does come with atomic design, but you can easily change what the drop-downs are. I know there's some people that, they didn't really understand, the atom molecules organism. They want stuff with like, this is the foundation stuff. These are the material stuff. These are the rooms. Whatever mental model you have, you can easily use that in Pattern Lab. And so the key thing is you want to be very efficient. You want to get from the wireframing process to the final built page as quickly as possible. And so for some people, you want to do sketching as far as you can go along. We do now, if I want to use the UX pin a lot, which makes it a lot easier and quickly to create wireframes and stuff that you can share. And at some point, you can easily put those into Pattern Lab. Sometimes if it might be a little bit too difficult to do in Pattern Lab, we'll go back real quickly to the wireframe to make some changes. And so basically, at each step, as you get closer toward the end, where we sort of have in the Drupal markup match within Pattern Lab. So we have Pattern Lab as sort of the gold standard. This is what the markup is. And whatever your final solution is has to match Pattern Lab. And so the one sort of downside currently is that in Pattern Lab, you have to sort of build something, once, and then you have to build it again in Drupal. And at first I was thinking, well, it'll be worth it. We'll get a lot of better designs and more collaboration. Maybe it'll take longer. I don't know. It turned out to take a lot less time. Even though we're building it twice, it's a lot easier to build something in Pattern Lab. So a lot of times, when I would sort of theme something in Drupal, by the end of the project, when I had all the bits and pieces in my head, I always wish, I could have refactored it. It would make more sense this way. You can't really do that in Drupal because it takes so long and hard to sort of put the markup together. The way I like to think about it is Pattern Lab is sort of like Play-Doh. You can easily, take something apart, rearrange it to create whatever markup styles you want. And Drupal, it's more like working with like stone. Like you make a mistake, it's going to be a lot of work to try to reconfigure it. And so you want to make those early changes and mistakes in something that's easier for you to use. And it's not like you have to do everything in Pattern Lab. There are some designers that, they're not really comfortable in designing in the browser. So you can do a lot of sketching, Photoshop, Sketch, Fireworks, whatever you use, before you get to the Pattern Lab stage. Others, they want to get in Pattern Lab as soon as possible. For them, it's a lot easier to get up and running to design in the browser. And so there's a flexible tool to make it a lot easier to get your final finished product.
All right, I don't know what's going on here, but definitely don't do that when you're doing Pattern Lab. Definitely make it part of your workflow. Make it very visible for large organizations. I know at Forum 1, everyone is aware of Pattern Lab. We're communicating, talking with the project managers, with the biz dev, everybody, how it's affecting the project. Is its bottom line. Is it making, as Dan was saying, is it longer, shorter to make stuff? And also, as Dan mentioned, that some visual designers might not be comfortable with using things like Git and checking things out in branches, and they don't have to if they don't want to, and they can if they want to, which is great. So at Forum, we definitely have a lot of visual designers who are comfortable with that. So it's great to be able to maybe instead of telling Dan, hey, adjust this 2 pixels this way, you can go ahead and do it yourself and check it in, and then everyone sees it. And if other people disagree, it'll come up quick. So I just want to summarize all the benefits that we talked about, and I might go through this a little quicker so we have time for any discussion if we want it. Shinier, more polished sites, which is my biggest concern, is just getting it prettier. It may be pretty with the old method, but this way, because we're working in that Play-Doh, as Dan was mentioning, you can really tweak things. And for a visual designer, it's a godsend. You're all these little things you wish, God, I wish the error message looked nicer. I wish the search button was this or that, or they accidentally used the wrong hover state for this button. You can do it and make it really, really nice. I encourage you to check out the USDA NIFA site that was a Pattern Lab site. Just, you can Google it and find the URL and play with the actual live Drupal site that was created using Pattern Lab. We've already got into this. The flexibility is very, very important, so that these things aren't just stuck we can't reuse it for mobile now that we used it for this thing. So Google Material Design really embraced this concept of modular design, and Pattern Lab encourages it, which is great. So happier clients. As we were mentioning before, not only were they playing with Pattern Lab and being happy, this was a particular environment where they had a lot of other stakeholders that didn't necessarily sit in our meetings. So she could show it to them and say, hey, here's Pattern Lab, here's what your particular section is going to look like. And it helped communicate, it helped her to communicate and show it to her people there. So it made her seem more successful to her peers and coworkers. So she was very, very happy, and we got stellar reviews. I think it was a 9.5 out of 10, which we do customer satisfaction, and so we were all really happy that she was happy and they were successful. And
so it's also very helpful for developers. We had a chat room we were sort of talking about, and we had used this on this project, and some of the developers started learning more about Pattern Lab. And one of them created this because he was like, oh, no, I can't wait to use it. All these good things we can do with annotations, all this kind of stuff, we make it easier. There's also, this allows, developers to sort of focus on one thing at a time rather than having to think of, building the site and the layout and trying to think of some of the design stuff. They can just focus on what they want. And so, again, we talked earlier, you can sort of separate, and have things going on at the same time. And then finally, the one of the real benefit is that all the styles and the theming that we do in Pattern Lab, those are the exact same styles and JavaScript and stuff that's in our theme. And so at Forum 1 we use the Gesso theme, which basically transforms the markup to follow the Drupal 8 CSS architecture guidelines. So it follows the SMACT approach. It uses the BEM naming conventions for all of the, and anything that Drupal spits out. And so we created a version of Pattern Lab that out of the box fits out all that same style, all the same markup that we get out of the box. And so it's very easy. You don't have to worry about having a convoluted process to say, you build it in theme at once, and you have to go back over here again and style it again. It just works together very well. And then on NIFA, as one example, is sometimes there was something that needed to be built before I could theme it, and they could sort of build it and then later go back and change it. There were other times when I would jump up ahead, and so when I had created all the markup and the styles for like a rotating banner or something that hadn't been developed yet, but we already had all the markup and styles in place, and since it's in a theme, the next following sprint or whatever, whenever they build it out, as soon as they're done building it, it's already themed because all the styles are already there.
Cool. So this one I can't guarantee, but I definitely spoke to some happy project managers. They said like the one particular project, I couldn't believe not only that we completed it on time, that we were under budget. He said there was some different allocations. Certain people had a little bit more allocation than before Pattern Lab, and others had much less, but the net effect was faster and under budget, which made the project managers very happy. And so these are some resources. We'll have a link out for the slide so you can click any of these and go to your different resources for this. And unfortunately, it looks like we don't have a lot of time for discussion, but we'd love to, if anyone wants to come up afterward to exchange cards and have a conversation offline, we'd love to speak to people as to their experiences either using it or any other tools that they've been using. And we're hiring, so we have forms in the back, little informational pamphlets, or leave us your business card, and we'd love to have a conversation with you about that as well. So, thank you.
Okay, are there any questions?
We have like 2 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, great presentation. Thanks, guys. Question? So,
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about the collaboration between, say, designers and front-end devs? A lot of designers can't code. Pattern Lab requires some knowledge of Mustache and to be able to sort of architect out that inside of the Drupal theme, I think, as you guys are doing. Do you use Photoshop to communicate? Who does the actual styling? The front-end dev, or should it be the designer?
So I think it'd probably speak a little bit to, because I'm the visual designer, so you're saying like how people could sorry, can you
repeat the question?
Sure, I'll repeat the question. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're asking how, speaking to visual designers who can't code, that you're saying that for them to go into Pattern Lab and go into the Mustache files and things like that, like who's doing the styling? At least here, I did the visual design in Photoshop and then handed it off to Dan, who would extract that stuff and start populating Pattern Lab with all the basic stuff like headings and things like that. And then after that, the designer, myself or others, might make little tweaks in code in HTML and communicate them to the. So it depends. It's not necessary to have the coding knowledge, but you do need a themer of some kind.
Yeah. So with Pattern Lab, you always need to have somebody to handle, that knows something. So you need somebody, that is familiar with Pattern Lab that can quickly create. Sometimes that is the designers. They can go in and create their own Mustache templates, create the new components. Sometimes, if you have a designer that doesn't, sometimes you can, the front-end developer can just go in there and quickly create a quick prototype, and then, send it back to the designer. They can go in and add the CSS if they're comfortable with it, or if not, just sort of sketch up something real quick and have a communication to sort of design those items.
I'm a developer. I'm sorry. We use the styleguide module a lot in Drupal, and it's kind of attacking this problem, but from the other angle. So the design's already done. Now we've got to find the gaps where we forgot to design a button, a drop-down, whatever that is. I guess what I'm getting at is there some kind of bridge or a mechanism of getting this kind of functionality in Drupal? Is there any work along that line? It looks like you guys compiled down your stuff and dropped it into your theme as a reference so that people can get to it and find it. I guess what I'm asking is, how do you get from that into your SAS or your compiled theme? Or is it using the same CSS? I don't know.
Sorry. Yes. Sorry, I'm hard of hearing. I can't really hear the question. Can you repeat it for me?
I'm sorry. I was putting stuff away. I'm sorry. Could you summarize briefly? I apologize profusely.
So how do you get your compiled Pattern Labs thing into your theme and bridge across from that to Drupal? Do you have a particular workflow that you follow?
Getting the CSS into Drupal for the workflow?
Oh, okay. So there's actually a variety of different ways you can do that. You can have Pattern Lab itself actually in the Drupal theme. And it's very easy to change the markup in Pattern Lab to sort of go up a couple of directories and get to the styles that are actually in the Drupal theme.
Okay.
You can also have it as its own separate, that's completely separate from the theme. You can design and do everything separately on your own thing, and later you can, copy the styles and whatever you've done into your theme. There's a variety of different ways you can handle that. You can have it.
So there's not like a module that just makes it happen yet.
There's no modules that make it happen yet.
No, there's no module for it. So what we do, in the Gesto theme, we have the Gesto theme, and then the PHP version of Pattern Lab, the Gesto version. Right now, they're two completely different things. I really was thinking about having it in the actual Gesto theme itself, but I was a little worried about some of the licensing stuff, because in Drupal, you have to make sure everything is GPL2 before you can have something that's on D.O. And if that is, maybe there's something where we'll have Pattern Lab that we have in the theme itself. But for right now, they're two separate things, because we also have, another reason we don't is because we also have like a WordPress theme and other tools that we use also might need like their standalone version of the Pattern Lab.
I sort of have the same exact question, but I'm just wondering, have you extrapolated from the markup just all the different things, status messages, et cetera, and put that into like a Git repo or whatever that you can just suck into Pattern Lab, and that way you can have all those things, and you can have them totally separated from Drupal, although maybe ultimately they'll end up back in Drupal, but they can also be in whatever system you need them to be in. Have you guys created something like that for yourselves, a little library, Git repo or whatever, and if you have, are you sharing that?
We created a library of Git repo, and are we sharing that for all the different status things from
all the different what?
So the Git repo for what again?
For like all the things that the style guide module is doing. It seems like one way to do that is just to make it manually. I'm not sure what you were just saying about pointing things at themes, but
right. So some of the stuff that we're doing is as we build more sites with Pattern Lab, is we're taking some of the stuff that we do use on a lot of projects, and we have we started off with like the Drupal messages, for example. But rather than be adding maybe some boilerplate view modes that we're not creating it on every project, we can just easily create them. Right now, the situation is that all of the templates in Pattern Lab are completely separate than any templates that are in Drupal. And luckily, in Drupal 8, one thing I'm really excited about is it's going to be using Twig, which is very, very similar to the mustache that's in Pattern Lab. And in Pattern Lab itself, they're actually creating new versions that are going to be using Twig itself. And so I'm really looking forward to the time when we can have sort of all of the Twig markup that's in Pattern Lab. We just do it in Twig instead of mustache, and then in the theme itself, you can either just use those same Twig things, or you can extend those with the Twig items that are in your theme. And so basically, you have one canonical sense, one canonical place for all of their templates, rather than having to create the markup once in Pattern Lab and again in Drupal.
Thanks.
There's another session here in 10 minutes. So.
Okay. Well, thank you for all your questions. Feel free to come up later.
So, are you how do you deal with the fact that there's another session right now?
It's not.
Have you seen this session here?
Okay.
Where?
Oh, where?
Maybe it's back to room.
Sorry, I don't know. Oh, I don't know. I think he mentioned the other session. Did you mention another session?
Oh, yeah, in 409. Okay. Like right now.
Yes, yeah. Okay.